The text this morning is in Luke chapter 10, and it's verse 38 through 42. It's about two women, sisters. I didn't pick it because it's a text about family, and we see family over Christmas, but it does apply. I picked it because of the topic. This week and next week we're going to talk about rest, and this week we're going to talk about daily rest, and the next week we're going to talk about Sabbath rest. So let me read this passage. As Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to him and asked, "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me." "Martha, Martha," the Lord answered, "you are worried and upset about many things, but only one thing is needed. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her." This is the word of the Lord. So New Year's Day is a wonderful time of festivity and celebration. We often get a break between Christmas and New Year's and hopefully a little bit afterwards. But it's also a time of looking forward to what we have to do in the next year. And I'll explain why I put this on in a little bit, but I'm just going to put it on now so I don't forget. So there's personal resolutions, sometimes there's family resolutions, but I thought I'd start out this morning by talking about church resolutions. Some time ago we had a vision retreat for a church, and it started out as a council retreat, then a leadership retreat, and then the week before we met it, John just said, "Well, why don't you all come?" And a lot of you came, and it was awesome to have a Monday night vision retreat to what God is leading us to do in the future here at church. I moved this to be able to see it better, so I'll put it right there. And so out of that retreat came, well, a list of things. We haven't done that much work on this since then, but a list of things. And these are really the things that came out of this retreat. So over the next year, we'd like to have a discipleship plan. And really the need is for those of us who are part of church, but also for people who are just joining church, to have a plan that people say, "Hey, I want to become a Christian. I want to join the church." We can have a plan of saying, well, this is what it means to grow in Christ. Right now, a lot of great things are happening organically, but not much is happening in terms of a systematic outline. This hasn't been a need in our churches in the past, but this is a need that came out of that, a very felt need that came out of that thing. This is what we want to do as a church. That is huge. A community center. So doing church as community center. Those of you who are part of the church know that we've been opening our doors more and more. We realize that life happens when you give it away. And we've grown. We've been blessed by the organizations that have come and done ministry here. And it's been an amazing, exciting thing. And we realize that, well, why not just be open all the time and function really as a community center, or better said, as a church that worships in a community center. And so that's the sort of idea here, but obviously that takes a lot of planning and a lot of work and a lot of pressing forward into new ways of thinking and doing things. This other one here, use of gifts, and really I think that's like, how can we all as a church be part of the church? So it's not just me and John and maybe 30 or 40 really dedicated leaders, but how can all of us be invited into life? And really, I think the best way to talk about that is talk about that little table there in terms of what's your call? Like, what is God calling you uniquely to do as a person, not only in this church, but wherever he has called you to do? That's obviously a huge thing with all sorts of facets. One thing that's not on here is fellowship. So when people join the church, how do we actually get to know each other, and just instead of saying, "Hi, good to see you," and next week, "Hi, good to see you," and next week, "Hi, good to see you," and like after a while it sort of wears thin, right? So how do we truly get to know each other? Like, that is a huge challenge. And great things are happening organically, but we have really not that great of a plan to do that. So, and then there's, of course, there's prayer and worship comes around every week, and now probably more than once a week. But other people are planning those services, so I'll share that later. So, you know, if we think about all these things, or perhaps just the things in your own life that you need to do this next year, it quickly can lead into one very sort of gripping, visceral emotion of anxiety, right? Like, oh my goodness, I got to do all these things. Like, how are we going to, like, what are you going to do? And certainly if I took this on myself, and maybe me and John would sit and stress around this and go home and talk to our wives about it, and then they'd say, stop talking, we come back talk to each other about it, right? And, we could have a lot of anxiety about this. And certainly when we think about the next year, we could think about anxiety situations all over the place, personal lives, family life, and church life together. But this passage this morning teaches us that the thing we're called to do when we get into these situations with lots of work to do, lots of opportunity, the first thing to do is talk a lot about it to your friends and family around you and just pour your anxiety on them, right? No, that's not what the passage teaches you to do. The first thing the passage teaches us to do is sit at the feet of Jesus and to rest. And so when we think about the first thing that we need to do as a church to live into where God has called us to do, the first thing that we're called to do is rest and find peace. Let's look at this passage together. And I even have a new clicker, and it works. See that? It doesn't click 3 or 4 times. It's amazing. All right. So that's happy. That was causing me some anxiety, by the way. All right. So here this passage is. So Jesus and his disciples were on their way. He had 12 disciples. He probably had more. He had some women who were followers. So Jesus and his disciples were on his way. This is a group of like 10 or 15, maybe 20, 25 people walking along. They could have been on the way from Jericho up to Jerusalem. They could have been going the other way. It doesn't say in Luke exactly what they were doing, but they're on their way. They're on a journey. They came to a village. The village is Bethany, where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. You know this passage. Martha gets a lot of bad press, but look at this. This is a woman who has a gift of hospitality. Her and her brother Lazarus and her sister Mary are probably a little bit more wealthy. Their parents are probably were wealthy. They have a nice home. They probably have a big courtyard. And Martha has a gift of hospitality. Her younger sister doesn't invite Jesus in. Lazarus doesn't invite Jesus in. Martha is a person who has a gift of hospitality and invites Jesus in. This is in itself is a great lesson. The Bible talks all over about hospitality, and now we are invited into it too in our own lives. But here Martha does it. Open her home. I mean, how many of y'all would open your home to a teacher and 15 of his sweaty followers, right? We don't do that today, but Martha did. All right. She also had a sister named Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. Now Mary, there's a lot of Marys in the Bible, right? There's a lot of Marys. So we don't know exactly how all the Marys are, the 1 Mary, 2 Mary, or 3 Marys, or 5 Marys. I know I have a sister named Mary. I just have one, thankfully. She's here today. That's why I said that. But so Mary, the sister of Martha. Now who is this? In John, we find out that Mary, the sister of Martha, anointed Jesus at one point with the oil, right? It could be that Mary is also the sinner who had been forgiven much, and that's why she does it. There's some people that think that Mary, the sister of Martha, is also Mary Magdalene. That's a bit of a stretch, but there's hints to it. In any case, Mary, the sister of Martha, is more than likely the younger sister who might have at some point demonstrated some irresponsibility, and certainly in this passage is demonstrating some sort of sense of irresponsibility by not helping her sister, and probably the household servants or slaves at that time, cook the food, right? Martha's in the kitchen getting all kind of food together, probably helping or direct a lot of other people, and Mary has snuck off, and she's sitting at Jesus' feet. Maybe that meant the outskirts, and maybe that meant she kind of went in between all the disciples and sat literally at his feet. We don't know. But in any case, there she is, not helping in the kitchen. You ever have this? You're making food, and things are going well, but there's someone who really should be helping, and they're over there talking their head off, right? And it's kind of irritating. It's pretty obvious that Martha gets some internal dialogue going on, because this is what she says next, right? She's distracted by all the preparations. Eventually she says this, Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me? But first of all, she's distracted by all the preparations that had been made. Now, up to this point, there's no sort of negativity about what Martha has done in this passage. She's simply distracted by all the preparations that have been made. You invite 13 guys into your house who will want to eat, perhaps have been on a long journey. There's going to be some preparations to make, right? And, nowadays in our time, you can put a meal together in about an hour and a half, a pretty decent meal, or maybe 2 hours. In that time, there was a lot more prep that had to be done. Even 100 years ago, it took about 6 hours a day to make food for your day in our country, and now it takes about an hour a day to make food for your family on average. We have all these conveniences. But the fact is that there's a lot of preparations to be done, and there is a lot of emphasis in the Bible about work is good, right? Work is a good thing. Making food is, in fact, fun. For some reason, when I have extra time on my hands, I find myself in the kitchen making food. And I don't know why exactly. I always find myself in the garage fixing cars, but I just like to make food. And this week I made a lot of food. I like working when it goes well and when I don't get anxious about it. So here's a representation of some of the things I've been working on this week. So in the car department, this is a water pump from our minivan. It's not really mini, but anyway, it's a water pump. And I've been having a lot of problems with my heating system in my van and this pump. I just think it's cool engineering with this impeller here that spins, but the fluid started to go from the inside to the outside, and that's bad. And so I had to fix that, among other things, on that van. You never know if I should keep fixing it or get rid of it, but that's where it is. Things that I had to do this week was finances, right? So you get these bills in the mail, right? I stopped opening some of them, right? Because, it's just irritating. And I get an email that I don't really need to open them. So there's always bills. There's books that I'm trying to learn from. This is a boundaries book that I want to use in preaching in a couple weeks or maybe a month, and talk about that after I internalize it myself. Bought a hard drive to back up Marsha's photos. Marsha loves her photos, and looking into the future, I'm thinking she's not going to be happy if her computer crashes and all her photos are gone. That's going to cause me a lot of anxiety. And so I bought a hard drive to back her photos up, did that. We all have, medical issues, or some of us do anyway, who are older, and so there's prescriptions. We can get to thinking about that. Some of us just get weird stuff that's happening. I won't tell you the weird stuff that's happening to me, because you really probably don't want to know. Then there's fun stuff. I'll go to this first. This is what we use to clean our laundry. Right, it's soap nuts. Someday I want to do a sermon about this, but I'll just give you a teaser today. Believe it or not, this cleans your clothes. I'll do a whole thing about that someday. And then there's fun things. I wanted to do fun things with the kids, especially Ani had some direct requests to learn things. So Christmas cookies. I learned how to make frosting this week, buttercream frosting. Turns out there's a lot of butter in buttercream frosting. Matter of fact, it's mostly butter and powdered sugar. You want it to have some nice cake, just take some butter and spread it on your cake, put some sprinkled sugar on top. Same thing. It's really good. And just some fun stuff. Roasted chestnuts. Anybody do that? I found some chestnuts at Big Top. They were cheap. And I roasted some of them. So that's, there's all these things we do in life. And some of them are for fun. Some of them are because we have to. But all of them, if we don't treat them the right way, can be sources of anxiety, especially the bills and the cars. Can be sources of anxiety. Work is good. Anxiety is not. Like I said, Martha has got some various obvious internal dialogue because eventually she blows up and interrupts Jesus and his disciples and just says this, Lord, don't you care? But you think, what had to be going on in her head to actually say this kind of statement? She probably started off by thinking about her sister. That younger sister of mine is always just leaving me and going and talking to Jesus and never really paying attention to the needs of the household. I'm just doing all the stuff that I need to do to take care of everybody, and she's always just doing this and then that, and maybe she had lived a life of sin, so she had gone off and done that for a while. Now she'd come back, and I love her and I want to care for her, but if she would just be more responsible. And then she switched her inner dialogue to Jesus. And now this is where it gets fascinating for me. Because if Mary had this special relationship with Jesus, if she had been a sinner and then found forgiveness and repentance and new life, probably they were pretty close, or perhaps she even got the sense of that Jesus and Mary had this special relationship. And Martha is kind of over-functioning, serving, preparing food, and she's thinking, I'm making food for Jesus, and I am doing all this for Jesus, and all these guys that follow him around, and some of them are just downright irritating, and Mary isn't, she's right there with them, and I'm making food for him, and she's making food together, making the squash and the meat and whatever else, and she's just getting more and more angry that she has to do all this stuff for Jesus when Mary actually gets to be with Jesus, and maybe Jesus just loves Mary more because he spends more time with her, talks to her more, and eventually she comes off with this statement that says, Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do all the work? And you get the sense that somewhere in her head she got the thought that maybe Jesus loved Mary more than her. How often do we have that where we're working for people and we start to get angry at them? Right? Because there's something going on emotionally. There's echoes in this passage of the story of the prodigal son, right? Where younger son went off and did all sorts of prodigal or foolish living and came back, and the father was right there having a party, and the older son's there the whole time and never really asked for anything, never really experienced his father's love because he never pressed into it and asked for it. And you get this sense of like a lot of duty and no relationship. And it had to be pretty extreme because for some reason this lady is willing to come in and interrupt 15 to 20 people who are having a discussion and say, Lord, don't you care? I mean, talk about an awkward moment, right? It's awkward silence, mad woman, bunch of guys are all like, I'm not getting part of this. And Jesus could have done any one of a number of things. He could have said, yeah, you're right, Mary, you should probably go help. He could have got mad at Martha. He could have been, Martha, what are you talking about, all this mess all the time? Just go make the foods. Leave us alone. We're men, right? But he didn't. He went in the middle ground. He said, Martha, Martha, you're worried and upset about many things, but only one thing is required. In the Greek it says, you're worried and upset about much, but only one is required. What is that one? It's not immediately obvious in the text what that one is. Is it sitting at the feet of Jesus? Is it the relationship with Jesus? Is it understanding that no matter how much stuff you're working on, that's really not the main thing? The main thing is actually just having peace in a relationship with Jesus? It certainly is somewhere in the middle of that. All this stuff we do, although it might be fun, it might be important, it might be critical even to get your clothes washed or your car fixed, all that stuff is just adiaphora, which is a fancy word for extra stuff. The one essential stuff, the main thing, is having a functional relationship with Jesus where we have, well, peace. 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 All right. So here's the final line. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken from her. What takes your peace from you? Is it your sister? Some of us, it might be exactly that. Your family member? Always picking, right? Your husband, your wife, right? You're just chilling, relaxing, all of a sudden, would you do this for me? Or, can you make the food a little better? For me, often it's myself, honestly. I give it up. I just give it up. I get anxious about all the stuff I have to do, and I get wired, and I just give it away. The voices in my head sort of make me think I should do more, I should be better, I should do this. I just give it away freely on my own will. See, in life, I think some of us have normal-sized backpacks with normal-sized amounts of things to do and the corresponding anxiety. And some of us, well, we like to go hiking. And we got big backpacks, and this really doesn't represent the amount of stuff we have to do. It represents our anxiety about it. And some of us walk around with a big backpack of anxiety, and honestly, it drives us, and that kind of is working pretty well for us, because anxiety can be a powerful thing. We watch movies sometimes to get that emotion of anxiety, which sort of makes us feel alive. Some of us are driven by our anxiety. I actually was driven by anxiety for a long time, still am to a certain extent. When I went back to seminary the second time, I realized that I need to get my stuff done, so I was driven by anxiety to get things done really, really, really early. But there's a better way to do things, and that is simply to just do them, right? Just do them. It's kind of a revelation for me. Push away anxiety and just do it. Some of us just aren't wired to be anxious people, and it's a blessing. I don't know quite how that works, but some of us have little backpacks of anxiety. This is a day pack I bought about 25 years ago. It's got holes all over, and this is sort of like our backpack. We just got a little bit, but it's got holes in it. Stuff just falls out all the time, and we're just walking around. And honestly, we're just not that anxious. We're really chill. Like Marcia said, her brother-in-law is just really relaxed, almost comatose sometimes, just so chill. All right, some of us just aren't wired to have a lot of anxiety in our lives. And that's a blessing. More power to you. Some of us are driven by it. But no matter who we are along the spectrum of personality and disposition and background, what are we supposed to do about it? How do we respond to anxiety? Well, first of all, to realize it is what it is. It is part of our lives. All of us have it from time to time. And maybe we want to interrupt Jesus and 12 of his disciples and our sister to be like, hey, can you help me out here? But all of us have it. To a certain extent, many of us are driven by it. I want to say this. I'm not sure I want to say this, but I'm going to say this. A lot of it is simply biological. Stuff is happening biologically that you might need to pay attention to it. When I drink coffee, I get anxious. What causes you to be anxious? Sometimes we're so driven by anxiety that you might need some medicine. There's anti-anxiety medicine. And that might be a really, really critical thing for you or someone you love to do. On the other side, there's people who are a little ADD, right? I might be one of them. So at one point, about 5-6 years ago, a guy who, a dear friend, and someone I worked with very closely in the church I was at, came in and said, here's the deal. I messed up, addiction-wise, and my wife found out, and I don't know what's going to happen. And so we talked and we prayed. He went to a regular counselor, and we kept talking, and eventually he found out that he was wildly ADD. And he got on Concerta, which is a medicine that extended release sort of Ritalin medicine, and it literally changed his life. He could pay attention in church. He could pay attention at the stop sign long enough to figure out if he still needed to go right or left. He just could not do this stuff anymore. And at that point, I realized that maybe I need to investigate whether I'm a little bit ADD, because I can be calm. I'm not an over-talker, except maybe on Sundays. But sometimes I just can't pay attention. And I found out, as I went through that process, that people who are ADD use anxiety to fuel their sort of initiative. And it's so powerful, since I got on just a little bit of medicine every day, to just simply be able to do things. And I share all that not because I want you to know I take some ADD medicine, because I really don't, but now you do. Including my family who's here, I never told them that. But because of this. There's no shame in pursuing the healing that you need. There's no shame in that. And some of us don't need medicine. We just need to go talk to somebody about our past. Some of us have been through some horrible, unspeakable, awful things, whether nationally in our family versus just with abuse. And if we don't talk about it, if we don't deal with it, it never gets dealt with. We take it into our retirement. Someone was just sharing with me this morning. Harry was just sharing with me this morning about her brother, who just isn't naturally disposed to deal with certain things. If that's you, and there's something in your life that you're just not dealing with, I want to invite you to do the hard work, the almost embarrassing work, of going and talking to someone about that very thing. So all that said, there are some ways to deal with it that I think are helpful this morning. First of all, we can be driven by our anxiety. I said that we can use our anxiety to sort of fuel us and help us get things done. And that maybe is okay for a certain extent, but living life this way is not that fun. We can also take our anxiety, our stress about our past and whatever it might be, and sort of like deal with it by diverting, right? So I'm feeling this inside, but I don't really want to deal with this, so what I'm going to do is play Mahjong instead, or play my Nintendo Wii system instead, or get on Facebook instead. I'm just going to avoid those feelings as long as I can, and go to work, come home, read the newspaper, watch sports, do everything I can to never deal with actually the significant issue that's in my life. All right, that's avoidance. It turns out that no matter how many times you try to deal with an issue by not dealing with it, it never gets dealt with. That is so irritating, isn't it? Like, why can't you just not deal with an issue and have it get dealt with, right? The most courageous thing that we can do is sort of use anxiety as an early warning system in our life. You know, when you have your car, if you have a car, and that engine light comes on, it says check engine, check engine, check engine. It's usually a good idea to check your engine, right? Now that said, the check engine light has been on in my van for like 4 years, and I haven't paid any attention to it because they messed up when they fixed the engine. But anxiety for me is like an early warning system on the dashboard of your life. If it's on, it's a good idea to check out what's going on in the background. And believe me, I know it's really hard to diagnose engine problems, right? Because sometimes you just can't figure out what's going on. And it's even more difficult to figure out what's going on the inside when your anxiety light comes on in the dashboard of your life. But what this text invites us to do this morning is to do just that. Mary is sitting at Jesus' feet, and I don't know what choices she made in the rest of her life, but this time, in this moment, she has chosen what is best. Martha's running around being fueled by her anxiety, doing work which is good, being anxious which is not. And Jesus says to her, Martha, Martha. What would Jesus say to you right now? How would he invite you to be less anxious? How would he invite you to be more centered, more at peace? How would he invite you to take time away from your work and to listen to him? What would that look like? Maybe it'd be devotions. Maybe it'd be simply going on a retreat. Maybe it'd be putting aside the food or the entertainment or whatever else is filling up the spaces in your life and listening to him. Maybe it's picking up a book that someone's recommended to you and then someone else recommended to you and then someone else recommended to you. And like, stop it with the book, God. Maybe it'd be a good idea to read it. Maybe it's a really hard, almost embarrassing work and go and talk to someone who gets paid to listen to you or a doctor who can help you. We're going to have communion this morning in a little bit. And usually when you think of communion, we sort of think of the things we've done morally that separate us from God, things like, well, maybe sexual stuff, or maybe hate or anger, or spending money the wrong way, or whatever sort of maybe violent tendencies or hurtful tendencies, maybe the conversations we've had with our family members that just wouldn't go real well. But anxiety, in the sense that it separates us from God, is a sin. It's not something else you have to feel anxious about or feel ashamed about, but when we're anxious, it powerfully separates us from God because we don't experience his peace. We don't experience his joy. And it's a natural, fully functional, helpful emotion in the sense that it tells us something ain't right. But when we live in anxiety, it absolutely, completely, not completely, but in a sense of every time, separates us from the love of God that he has for us. God wants us to live in peace. He wants us to live in joy. And that's why it says in the Bible so often, do not fear, for I am with you. Paul writes, do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, present your requests to God. This is a passage that I want to focus on. I think one of the things growing up that I had to learn slowly but surely is that sometimes Christianity just feels like a whole bunch of obligations, right? All kinds of duty. You got to go to church and listen and wear the nice clothes and be moral and not go out with your friends and party and all this kind of stuff you can't do. And you get the sense that Jesus is trying to take away my fun in life and not let me experience anything. And Jesus says, he addresses this directly. He says, here's the deal. The thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy. That's his job. That's what he does. I have come that you might have life. He doesn't want us to go around feeling anxious with a great big burden. He doesn't want us to fear the future. He wants us to know that he wants us to have life. And when we put aside anxiety, we get to experience things that we never thought we would experience. Fullness and joy and experiencing exactly what we're called to do and relationships around us and having God provide for us not only things but opportunities and experiences that we would never have experienced otherwise. A small illustration is the fun that I have fixing vehicles. Sometimes it's too much, but I never would have anticipated that I'd be able to do that. I don't know what God has for you. But this morning, as we take communion, I want to invite you to think about the ways that you can give up your anxiety and experience the peace of Jesus and choose what is best. Let's pray. Father God, I thank you that you have presented us with incredible opportunity to experience your peace and joy. I thank you that you've shown us that even though work is awesome, we don't need to be, it's not the main thing. It's not what we're called to do 100% of the time, just work and work and work and work and work. But I ask that you would come into each one of our situations, and some of them truly are filled with anxiety about new bosses that are crazy or lack of work and it just presses down in on us, or family situations that just don't get resolved with who knows what. Lord, I pray that you would give us your peace. You'd help us to choose what is best, and you wouldn't allow anybody or anything, including ourselves, to take it away. But I pray that by your Spirit you come into this place as we take communion, as we accept the gift of communion, that you would just fill our hearts. Give us peace, give us your joy, and show us a way forward as only you can do. In the name of Jesus Christ, we pray these things. Amen.